Well, good morning, family. We did that in first service, and Walter it was closing out. He just felt led to do it, and it was awesome. And I wanted you guys to have the same blessing and benefit that they had. I thought that was a great exercise. So, and I thought worship this morning was just amazing. I have thoroughly enjoyed so far our time together, and so I'm looking forward to being with you guys for a little while. For those that don't know me, my name is Lenny. I'm the family pastor here at Crossroads. Lowell is visiting some family this week. I know he was at least with his middle daughter earlier in the week, because I actually got a chance to speak to her on the phone, and it was great to catch up with her. I had not talked with her in a while, and so he'll be back with us next Sunday. And in normal Lowell fashion, he texted me this morning and, said, "Hey, good luck, praying for you. And by the way, don't blow it." So I replied back. I said, "Hey, advantage to, not being the lead pastor is that the buck stops with you. So if this goes over well, you can pat yourself on the back. If it doesn't, then I'll be handing out your phone number here at the end of service." So I am glad to be with you today, and I want to just kind of share with you. I want to start by just kind of telling you a quick little story. And years ago, when I was on staff as a youth pastor, I was really kind of trying to come up with some ideas of things to do with kids, and I've always had this passion in me to do outdoor adventure stuff. And so I had already started taking some kids like hiking and camping and backpacking, but I really wanted to take it up to a whole new level, and I wanted to start doing rock climbing and rappelling and things like that. But I didn't have a whole lot of experience I had some experience in rock climbing and rappelling, but not a whole lot. So I'm having lunch with Josh Fletcher, who used to be on staff here, and Josh is like, "Oh, I've got this guy that I need to introduce you to." And he's like, "Man, I just think you and this guy named Bobby Dion would just hit it off." I'm not sure who benefited more from that, whether it was Bobby or I, but I think one of us got the better end of the deal. I'll leave that up to you to decide who that was. But Bobby and I ended up talking on the phone and texting back and forth a couple of times before we actually met. So the day that we're having lunch, he and I had no conversation other than just a few little, "Hey, we're going to meet here, looking forward to getting to know you, blah, blah." And we show up that day. I said in first service that we were dressed alike. Actually, Bobby was dressed like me. I'm going to go with that version. So, but Bobby and I were literally dressed alike. I mean, we had on almost identical matching outfits. And throughout the years, we have routinely found ourselves, we'll come into work and we'll be wearing very similar outfits. It happened when we worked together at Capstone. It even happens now that we're back on staff. And so we joke about how that frequently happens. But there's a reason that it happens, besides the fact that we're just stylish dressers. It happens because Bobby and I are both outdoor enthusiasts, and being an outdoor enthusiast, just like many communities, we kind of have an unspoken uniform that we wear. I'm currently wearing Columbia pants, and I think I've got on Keen shoes and a North Face shirt. And so I'm wearing brands that are kind of associated with outdoors, and Bobby does the same thing. If I would have come up here this morning wearing just a set of scrubs, you would have thought I was part of maybe the medical community. And if you think about a community, most of the time there are some physical markers and some uniforms and some styles that kind of help us identify that. They have different logos and different outfits and things like that. If I were to step up here and I were to have the hat that I wore today has a big red flag with a white line through it. If you're part of the diving community, you would know what that means. And so there are different logos, different brands, different things like that we associate with the community. But a community is kind of a pretty broad spectrum, right? It's a group of people, but they may have some things in common, but they also have a tremendous amount of things that are different. We live in Cabarrus County in Concord, and Concord is the community in which we live in. But our community is very diverse. There are some things that are kind of threads that kind of go throughout our community, but we're also a melting pot like many communities are. We have people that are from different economic backgrounds. We have people from different educational backgrounds, different social and cultural and racial backgrounds. And so we're a melting pot. At a community level, we're a melting pot. The problem with just being a part of a community is that I can wear an outfit and wear certain logos and things like that will assimilate me and identify me as being part of the community, but that's as far as it goes. The next kind of step forward in that would be a culture. Oftentimes, you start figuring out, once you become a part of a community, that while it's a melting pot, there are some underlying cultures within that community. And most of us naturally gravitate towards some of those cultures. A few weeks ago, I was scuba diving, and on day one, we had been diving somewhere else. So when we came back to the resort that we were staying at, we were going to be diving the next day. So I'm cleaning and prepping all my gear and everything, and I'm getting ready to dive the next day. I've got everything hanging up. And that evening, a lot of people started kind of packing their stuff up and putting it in the trailer. And I just didn't want to go through the hassle of having to drag everything out the next morning. And so I just left all of my gear hanging up for the evening. And the reason I did that is because as I've become more and more immersed into the diving culture, not just the community, but the diving culture, I realized that there are some similarities to the diving culture that are the same as for the climbing community culture. And that is that once you kind of assimilate into the climbing community, you begin to realize that when you start climbing in some of these remote areas, most of those areas are going to be populated with other people who are really into climbing. And so it is perfectly safe for climbers to leave gear, there and leave it placed and stuff like that, because when you're part of the climbing culture, you understand that climbers don't mess with other climbers' gear. It's just not something that we do. And the same holds true for people who are in the diving community and in the diving culture. Those people who would be staying at the resort are people who would be avid divers. They're not just students who may be trying something out, but they're part of a much deeper culture within that community. And we just don't mess with each other's gear. So a community and a culture are great, but one of the things that I learned on my many trips to Africa is that when we go to Kenya and we go to visit these communities and these cultures, what we're really visiting is tribes, right? Within a community, there's a community, and those communities may be made up of several different tribes, and each tribe or each region may start to have a culture. But when you get down to the tribe level, you realize that there are much, much deeper internal bonds and things that they have. They don't just have traditional wear or maybe traditional jewelry or traditional things like that, but there are deep-rooted values at the core of who they are. First of all, many of them are genetically related. They can trace their ancestry back generation after generation after generation. They are genetically DNA at a DNA level are related. Okay? They have deep family ties. Okay? Again, most of these villages and most of these tribes are occupied by family members that have been together for decades, generations. So they have these deep family bonds. They also have deep core values. And those core values, regardless of where you go within that tribe, you can go from village to village, but no matter where you go within that tribe, what is acceptable here will also be acceptable here, and what is unacceptable here will also be unacceptable over here. A while back, I was rereading a book called Sticky Faith, and one of the issues that they were trying to address is the fact that we live in a much more diverse culture and community, and as we diversify and as we do that, we are losing certain aspects of our identity. And what I mean by that is that just even as recently as my generation, when I was in school, you oftentimes went to church, school, and played sports with the same kids and the same family from the same community, the same culture, and whether we called it or not, the same tribe. And the beauty and the benefit of that is what was acceptable or unacceptable in this place was the same here and the same here. And so as families and as individuals, there was this cohesiveness to the way that we developed and the way that we grew. But that's not necessarily the case now. And so when I started this journey of my Christian faith, I easily assimilated into the Christian community. Right? I started attending church. I started sitting in seats very similar to what you and I sit in today, and I listened to music, and there were some community level things that I did. And then after a while, I began to get more deeply immersed into the culture. I started attending Bible studies, other things like that. But I quickly realized that if I'm going to truly grow in my faith, then I'm going to need to take it even deeper than that and take it to a tribe level. That I need to be connected in a group of people who are committed to following Christ and committed to pursuing Him in this abundant life that He offers, and that they're willing to walk alongside one another and encourage and pray and really go hard after this Jesus. The reality is that Jesus offers us this life. He says, I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. But for many of us, that may not necessarily be the case or what we experience. In his book, Messy Spirituality, Mike Yaconelli opens one of his chapters with this quick little story. One of my favorite Peanut characters, or one of my favorite Peanut cartoons, starts with Lucy at her 5-cent psychology booth where Charlie has stopped to ask for some advice on life. Life is like deck chairs, Charlie, she said. On the cruise ship of life, some people are placing their deck chairs at the rear of the ship so they can see where they've been. Others are placing them on the front of the ship so they can see where they're going. The good doctor looks puzzled at her client and asks, which way is your deck chair facing, Charlie? Without hesitation, Charlie replied, I can't even get my deck chair open. I don't know how you feel, but oftentimes in my faith journey, I feel a lot like Charlie in that I'm having a hard time getting my deck chair open. In fact, I've heard life is described as being the cruise director on the cruise ship of life, and while the ship's sinking, we're trying to rearrange the deck chairs. See, Jesus offers this abundant life and life to the full, but many of us, if we're honest with ourselves, struggle to find it. And so I want to challenge you today over the next few minutes is to begin to ask yourself what kind of qualities you and I might look for in a person who is passionately pursuing Jesus. Do we possess those qualities, and at a tribal level, do we surround ourselves with those people? Now, please hear me. There's nothing wrong with being part of a diverse community. There's nothing wrong with being part of a culture. I'm not saying that. But at the depth of who we are as we're growing in our faith, I'm going to challenge us that at a tribal level, we're going to see some change. It starts by looking for a few qualities. People who, in my opinion, and there are many qualities, but people who are honestly pursuing Jesus, one of the qualities that we may recognize in them is that they have stopped pretending. Now, that's hard to talk about in church because, unfortunately, the written rule is church is for us to pretend. We want you to pretend that your marriage is okay. We want you to pretend that your family's okay. We want you to pretend that your job is okay. We want you to pretend that everything is good. It's all good. How's your day? It's great. Meanwhile, our marriage is in shambles. Our kids are struggling. We're burned out on our job. Outwardly, we act like God's in control, while inwardly, at a heart level, we're just not convinced. The problem with pretending is the main ingredient in non-relationship. Because people who pretend have pretend relationships. I want to challenge us first and foremost that our faith walk stops when you and I stop pretending that we have it all together. People who are actively pursuing Jesus recognize that they are unfinished, that they are incomplete. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus reminds us that He's the one that leads us in the way, that He is the one that establishes truth, that He is the one that provides life, and that He is the one and the only one that brings us to the Father. That you and I are incomplete. If we recognize that we're unfinished, it allows us to recognize that we're imperfect. I think about the Old Testament and the law that was given and the generation after generation of Pharisees that studied and studied and studied, and the people of God that studied and studied the law and had it dialed into a perfect adherence to the law. That they had this elaborate checklist that they could go to that would signify that they had done all the right things. Yet Jesus says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You are like whitewashed tombs. You may look nice on the outside, but on the inside you are dead bones and unclean. We are imperfect. Even our best efforts are described as filthy rags. Unfinished people not only recognize they're incomplete and imperfect, but they recognize that they're in process. That they are a work that Christ has started and has promised to complete. That it's not up to themselves to fix themselves. You and I could go right now to any number of bookstores and there would be entire sections devoted to self-help. There would also be entire sections devoted to Christian help. Because the reality is that we are unfinished and we are a work in progress. The next thing that a person who is actively pursuing Christ might recognize or might possess is they recognize that they are incompetent. Incompetent. It's interesting. First time I ever noticed this, but the other day as I'm preparing and I'm looking at the bullet point of that, I'm going, incompetent. Lord, what do you give me a good example? And all of a sudden I realized that if I open my Bible, starting in chapter 3 of Genesis all the way to the end of Revelation, it's all about God fixing what we screwed up. And that the only reason that the first 2 chapters don't include that is because you and I aren't in it. That the moment you and I were introduced to the God story, it became a rescue mission. It became a redemption story. The only analogy I come up with is it'd be like having, in the garden, it would have been like having the perfect, most luxurious car. And God coming to you and going, listen, I'm going to give you this car. It will do anything that you want it to or imagine or whatever, and you don't have to do anything to take care of it. All I want you to do is just enjoy it, ride around in it, use it to its fullest capacity. There's only one rule. Don't push the red button. And he hands you the key fob that starts the car, and you get in it, and you go, you mean this red button? And then comes the law. And God's going, okay, you want to drive the car yourself? Fine. Here's the owner's manual. And you're going, I don't even know where to begin. I don't know anything about cars. I mean, does it run off of batteries? Does it have a motor? I mean, I have no idea how this thing works. And no, you wanted the responsibility. Here you go. Here's the owner's manual. The entire Old Testament is story after story after story of what starts out as relatively seemingly great individuals who mess it all up. They become dependent on God, and they're doing what God's asking them to do, and then all of a sudden they're going, hey, this next task, I got this one. Let me take this one. And there begins the rescue mission. The New Testament, Jesus comes on the scene and goes, listen, it's just going to be easier for me to do everything for you. You are completely incapable of doing it. I'm going to live the righteous life. I'll fulfill the law. Heck, you're so bad, let me even teach you how to pray. So Jesus comes, lives this perfectly righteous life, lives this above and beyond adequate example of how we should live, tells us, hey, I'm going to give you authority, I'm going to give you power to do it. But then the next 2/3 of the New Testament are the very church leaders writing us letters going, that's not what he meant. That's not how you do it. You and I, at the end of Jesus' life, had one command: love others as much as we love God with all our heart, mind, and soul. Love others as much as we love ourselves. And then 2/3 of the Bible are going, that's not how you love each other well. Let me remind you of how you love each other well. Let me remind you of how you do relationship. You and I, left to ourselves, are completely incompetent when it comes to our salvation and restoration and our faith. That's the reason that we're given the Holy Spirit. The next topic may be hard for you to hear and accept, but people who are truly going after Jesus are desperate. Desperation is not a word that is elevated very much in our culture. In fact, quite honestly, it's frowned upon. But people who are actively pursuing Jesus recognize that they need to stop pretending, that they are unfinished, that they are incompetent. And the realization of those things drives them to desperation. And desperation, if we will allow it, will produce some pretty great things in us. People who are desperate oftentimes are focused. They are focused on how to overcome that desperation and what it's going to take to get out of that situation. And when we allow ourselves to become desperate, we allow ourselves to become focused and dependent on Him, and it brings us to a place where we can begin to receive the healing and the wholeness and the work that He wants to do in us. People who are desperate develop disciplines that allow them to become uncompromising. In our small group Wednesday night series, we're walking through spiritual disciplines, and early on, the author of the book we're using, Richard Foster, had this quote. Josh had shared it with me in one of our discussions, and it says, spiritual discipline is something that we can do that allows God to do in us something that we cannot do. Desperate people develop disciplines that God uses to empower them to become uncompromising in their pursuit of His heart. And out of that, we develop a willingness to do whatever it takes to pursue this life that Jesus offers us. As the band comes out, I want to close with what I think may be the hardest, but the most important quality that someone who is actively pursuing Jesus may possess. And that is that they are in committed relationships. A few years ago, a group of families that my wife and I had been meeting with for a number of years adopted the word tribe to describe our group. And it wasn't a word that I came up with. It was a word that was revealed to me through a study that I was doing. But the reason that we chose that word is because we realized that that's what it was, that this group of families that we had attached ourselves to, that we had become deeply committed to in a lot of different ways, that our lives were meshed together, and that we shared deep-rooted beliefs and desires to be more and more like Jesus and who Jesus was, and that we were encouraging one another to go deeper in our faith. Jesus could have done ministry any way that he wanted to, but he picked 12 disciples to do life with, to walk with, to hang out with, to eat with, to do ministry with. And he picked 12 completely incapable, incompetent, broken individuals. Ones that he knew would betray him. Ones that he knew would deny him. Ones that he knew would die because of him. But the beautiful thing about being in a relationship is that it benefits all of us. We become strengthened and encouraged. A few months ago, when my wife was having some chest pain and her heart was racing at 180 beats per minute, and I'm rushing her to the hospital, my second phone call was to call Randy. My first was to my tribe to go, hey, I need help. I'm in trouble. And by the time I had dropped Katie off, 2 of those individuals were already on their way to the parking lot to pray with us. Because that's what a tribe does for one another. That's what desperate people who are incomplete, unfinished, broken, but trying everything in their hearts to pursue this Jesus, that's what they do for one another. Hebrews 24 says, let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another all the more as we see the day approaching. My prayer for each and every one of you in here is that you may find a tribe and love them hard.